Rain tapped softly against the porch roof, a familiar rhythm that Caleb Mercer no longer noticed. He sat still in the wooden chair just inside the doorframe, eyes fixed on the pine-covered hills that faded into the mist beyond Willow Creek. The evening air smelled like wet earth and memory. This time of year always felt heavier. It wasn't the weather, it was the silence. And the way the silence wrapped itself around the house like ivy, clinging to everything Emma had left behind. He pulled the wool blanket tighter around his shoulders, though the chill wasn't what made him shiver. Inside, the house was just as he'd left it that morning. Tidy, quiet, cold. The same 2 rooms, the same worn floorboards, the same ticking clock that hadn't kept real time in months. He never bothered to wind it anymore. Caleb's boots thudded softly against the floor as he rose and walked into the back room. He paused just inside the door, hand resting on the frame. The room hadn't changed in 5 years, not since the last morning he'd carried William's satchel out the door and told him he'd see him again soon. The little bed was still tucked against the wall. The crocheted blanket Emma made, the one with the lopsided edge, still folded at the foot. On the small shelf above the desk, the wooden rabbit sat where it always had, its ears slightly chipped. Caleb had carved it for William's 4th birthday. He reached for the toy, running a thumb along its back. The wood was smooth now, polished by small hands and years of absence. "You'd be 10 now," he whispered, voice breaking as it hit the air. "God, what would you look like?" No answer came, only the sound of wind rustling through the pine trees outside. Caleb set the rabbit back down and stepped out of the room, closing the door gently behind him. He didn't like staying in there too long. It made hope creep in, and hope, he'd learned, was the cruelest kind of liar. He moved to the kitchen, lit the oil lamp, and stared at the empty table. He used to eat dinner with laughter bouncing off these walls. Emma humming while she stirred something on the stove. William asking endless questions about trees and trains and what clouds were made of. Now, silence was the guest that never left. The knock came just as he sat down, a quick double rap on the front door that made him flinch. Caleb didn't get many visitors anymore. He preferred it that way. He stood slowly, pulled open the door. Pastor Holloway stood on the porch, hat in hand, hair damp from the rain. His wool coat was soaked through. "Evening, Caleb," he said, voice soft, almost cautious. Caleb raised an eyebrow. "This late?" The pastor nodded. "I wouldn't come if it weren't important." Caleb stepped aside and let him in. The pastor wiped his boots carefully, glancing around as though half expecting Emma to be there, smiling and welcoming him in with a cup of cider. Caleb noticed the pause and said nothing. "What is it?" he asked, settling back into the chair. "There's a young woman. Came in on the late train. Teacher from Asheville." The pastor paused. "She's got a little girl with her." Caleb's jaw tightened. He already didn't like where this was going. She was supposed to start at the schoolhouse Monday, but turns out the position was already filled. Mix-up with the schedule. By the time she got here, the town already gave it to Mabel Jenkins. So, she's got nowhere to stay. Her bag was taken at the depot. Her money, too. Sheriff Curtis looked into it, but the pastor hesitated. "We offered her the spare room at our place, but my sister and her boys are still with us from Winston." Caleb didn't answer. "She's waiting down at the church now. I told her I'd try to find somewhere safe for the night. I wouldn't ask, except, well, you've got space." Caleb stood, moving toward the fire. He grabbed a log from the basket and set it gently into the stove. "You want a single woman and her daughter staying in this house? With me?" His voice carried the edge of disbelief. It's just for tonight, the pastor said quickly. Until I sort something out tomorrow, she's quiet, polite. Not asking for charity. And you thought of me? The pastor offered a half smile. You're not exactly booked solid. Caleb turned to look at him. I didn't mean it that way. Silence stretched again. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, staring into the flickering firelight. You said there's a little girl? Becky. 6, maybe 7. Looks like a daisy in the rain. Caleb exhaled sharply through his nose. He didn't want the sound of small feet echoing through these rooms again. He didn't want to remember. But the rain kept falling, and the image of a child standing outside the church, waiting in soaked clothes beside a mother who had nothing left. It settled like a stone in his gut. Just one night, he muttered. The pastor's shoulders relaxed. That's all I ask. Caleb walked to the spare room and started pulling old linens from the shelf. He hadn't touched this room since Emma folded the last blanket. The pastor returned 20 minutes later, the woman beside him. She wasn't what Caleb expected, not timid, not flustered. She stood with her back straight, her daughter's small hand tucked into hers. Her eyes met his without flinching. Mr. Mercer, she said, her voice calm. I appreciate your hospitality. Caleb gave a curt nod. This is Becky, she added. The little girl stepped forward shyly, her curls damp from the rain. Hello? Caleb forced a stiff nod. Evening? He stepped aside. The house suddenly felt smaller, warmer, louder. Becky's shoes squeaked on the floor as she walked inside. Eleanor glanced around, seeming to take mental notes, but didn't comment on the faded wallpaper or the threadbare curtains. You'll be in the room on the right, Caleb said. Fire's lit, sheets are clean. I'll stay out of your way. Thank you, Eleanor replied. The pastor smiled. I'll return in the morning. Once he was gone, silence returned. Eleanor gently pulled Becky's coat from her shoulders and hung it by the door. Do you mind if I make her some tea? Just warm her up before bed. Caleb hesitated, then nodded. Pots on the stove. She moved through the kitchen like someone used to making do, careful, deliberate. Becky sat quietly at the table, watching Caleb with wide eyes. He looked away. Is this your house? She asked. It is. Do you have any kids? Eleanor hushed her, but Caleb's expression didn't change. He just stared into the fire. Had a son, he said, long time ago. Oh, Becky said. I'm sorry. Eleanor met his gaze for a second, then looked down. Come on, sweet girl. Let's get you to bed. A little while later, the door to the guest room clicked shut. Caleb stood in the front room, staring at the rocking chair by the fire. Emma used to sit there and hum while she mended clothes. He remembered how her hands moved, nimble and certain. Tonight, the chair sat empty, but not untouched. A new blanket had been draped over the back, simple. Neat, smelled faintly of lavender. Caleb sat down, the weight of the day pressing on him. One night. That's all it was supposed to be. But something told him that this woman and her daughter had walked into his life for more than just shelter. Something unspoken had shifted already, and it scared him more than he wanted to admit. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The morning light crept in slow and golden, dusting the kitchen floorboards like it was hesitant to disturb the quiet. Caleb stood at the stove, hands wrapped around a steaming mug, watching the clouds shift over the hills. He hadn't slept much. The cottage hadn't held that much sound in years. Not just the creak of footsteps and the distant rustle of a child turning in bed, but life. The kind of presence that reminded you the walls weren't just for holding up a roof. He heard the bedroom door open behind him. Eleanor's footsteps were light, but measured, like someone used to tiptoeing through unfamiliar homes. Becky followed, still sleepy-eyed, her curls wild and cheeks flushed from sleep. "Good morning," Eleanor said, voice soft. Caleb nodded. "Coffee's on. Water's warm if she wants tea." Eleanor smiled faintly. "That would be lovely." She moved past him, careful not to brush too close, and pulled 2 cups from the cabinet, like she'd been in the house a dozen times before. Caleb watched her, how she moved with the calm, efficient grace of a woman who didn't waste energy on unnecessary fuss. She didn't fumble, didn't ask where things were, just did what needed doing. Becky climbed into the chair by the window, eyes drifting toward the garden that sat neglected under last night's rain. "Do you grow things?" she asked Caleb. "Used to," he replied. "Emma had a green thumb. Mine's more of a hammer." The words left a silence in their wake. Eleanor glanced at him, surprised. Maybe at the rare mention of his wife's name. Or maybe at the softness in the way he'd said it. Becky didn't respond. She was already distracted by a butterfly tapping at the window pane. Caleb cleared his throat and stepped away from the stove. "Pastor'll be by soon. I imagine he's looking for a better plan than shuffling you 2 round town." Eleanor stirred her tea without looking up. "It's not the first time we've been in between." Caleb leaned against the doorframe. "Asheville to Willow Creek's a long way for an unsure job." "I thought the position was confirmed." She gave a tight smile. "Turns out, letters and promises travel slower than local gossip." He watched her for a moment. "Why take the risk?" She paused. Then, "Because sometimes you have to chase what might be better, even if it might not wait for you." Caleb studied her face. There was something behind those words, something heavier than a lost teaching job or a stolen satchel. Something that pressed behind her eyes, like a question she hadn't dared to ask out loud. Before he could respond, there was a knock at the door. Caleb opened it to find Pastor Holloway, raincoat slung over one arm, and Ruth trailing behind him with a basket of folded linens. "Morning," the pastor said, cheer in his voice. "Hope you've managed all right." "Still standing," Caleb replied, stepping aside. Ruth swept in, warm and bustling. "We brought extra towels and a bit of peach bread. Becky, sweet thing, you must try a slice while it's still warm." Becky's eyes lit up. "Yes, please." Eleanor stood. "That's very kind of you." "We're just glad you've landed on friendly ground," Ruth replied. "You never know how a new place might receive you." The pastor looked between Caleb and Eleanor. "I've been asking around. Boarding house is full up with lumbermen. Mrs. Hartley offered her parlor, but her son's sick with the grip, and it wouldn't be safe for a child. So, that leaves us few options." Ruth's eyes flicked briefly to her husband, then back to Eleanor. "What about extended arrangements?" Eleanor's shoulders tensed. Caleb felt it too. That pause in the air, like a thread pulled tight. "I wouldn't impose," Eleanor said quickly. "You've all been generous already." "No one's suggesting charity," the pastor added. "But practical solutions sometimes wear strange clothes." He looked to Caleb. Caleb stared back, jaw tight. "We already agreed it was one night." "I know." The pastor nodded. "And I understand. But if Eleanor's willing, it could be longer." "Temporary. For stability's sake. School board might have an opening next month. Until then, she needs a roof. Becky needs structure." Ruth interjected gently. There are ways to ease town tongues. Practical ways. Eleanor stood straighter. You mean marriage? No one said anything. Becky looked up from her bread, confused. Caleb stepped forward. That's not what was offered. I agreed to one night, not... I'm not asking, Eleanor said, cutting him off. Not sharp, but clear. I wouldn't put myself in that position for shelter. I've made it on less. Ruth stepped between them, her tone firm but kind. No one's suggesting you barter your dignity, dear. But this town, it's small. And small towns measure decency in appearances, not intentions. Living here alone with Mr. Mercer invites questions. A ring answers them. I don't need a ring to know who I am, Eleanor replied. And I won't marry a man I barely know for convenience. I've survived worse than gossip. The room thickened with tension. Becky reached for her mother's hand. Caleb's eyes never left Eleanor. Something about her refusal, so calm, so unshaken, it sparked something unexpected in him. Not offense, not irritation. Respect. And something else. Something unfamiliar and quieter. I didn't expect you to, he said finally. But you and the girl can stay. For a while. If you want. Eleanor looked at him, measuring his words. Without expectation? Without, he said. This house has 2 bedrooms. I work long hours. You'll hardly notice I'm here. And if the school doesn't take me on? Caleb shrugged. Then you figure out the next step, one thing at a time. The pastor let out a slow breath, like a kettle taken off the stove. Then that settles it. For now. Ruth touched Eleanor's arm gently. You have my number. If you need anything, you come find me. Thank you, Eleanor said quietly. The Holloways left soon after, the screen door clicking shut behind them. In the quiet that followed, Eleanor turned to Caleb. I meant what I said. I won't be anyone's burden. He nodded. I don't carry what I can't lift. Their eyes held for a moment. Something passed between them. Not warmth. Not yet. But the recognition of 2 people who'd both been broken in places that didn't always show. Later, as the sun slipped low, Eleanor stood in the doorway of the spare room, folding Becky's small dress over the footboard. You didn't have to offer, she said. I know. But you did. Caleb didn't answer. He just turned back to the stove, watching the flame curl around the wood. Behind him, Eleanor's quiet footsteps faded down the hallway. That night, he sat by the fire long after they'd gone to bed, the wooden rabbit resting in his palm. A stranger had entered his house, but she didn't feel like a stranger anymore. The following morning, sunlight filtered through the kitchen curtains in thin gold ribbons. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and warm milk. Caleb stepped out of his room, boots soft on the worn pine floor, and stopped short when he saw Eleanor standing by the stove. Her hair was pinned up, a few strands falling around her face. She wore a faded lavender blouse, tucked neatly into a brown skirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows. She looked comfortable there, too comfortable. Like the house had decided to welcome her before he had. Didn't mean to wake you, she said without turning around. You didn't, Caleb replied. I'm always up before the sun. Habit? Regret. She glanced over her shoulder, a faint crease between her brows. Caleb shifted uncomfortably and looked away. Coffee's ready, she offered. Becky's still asleep. I figured I'd make something simple. There's oats in your pantry, but I found some apples and honey. He nodded slowly. You didn't need to do all that. I know, she said, and went back to stirring. He moved to the table, sitting in his usual spot by the window. The view was quiet, mist curling over the hills like breath. It should have calmed him, but it didn't, not with the echo of her voice still in the air. Eleanor brought over 2 bowls and set one in front of him without a word. She sat across from him, careful not to let their knees bump beneath the table. They ate in silence for a few minutes, the clink of spoons the only sound. "I'll be looking for work today," she said finally. "If nothing's open, I'll ask at the Mercantile or maybe the post office." "Not many openings in Willow Creek," Caleb said. "Not unless you want to learn to mend fences or stack lumber." "I've done worse," she said, calm but firm. He studied her across the table. There was a certain stubbornness to her. Quiet, yes, but immovable, like Riverstone. Becky had that same steady look when she was thinking. He'd noticed it yesterday. "You didn't come here just for a job," he said. She paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. "You left Asheville. You had choices. And I don't think it was just about employment." Eleanor set her spoon down. Her fingers folded neatly in her lap. "I had a life there, but it was a borrowed one." She looked him in the eye. "My husband passed 4 years ago. He left more debts than dreams. I stayed for as long as I could, until I couldn't." Caleb nodded once. "So you came here, to start fresh, for Becky, for me." He leaned back in his chair. "New beginnings aren't free. I know, but I'm not asking for anything I don't intend to earn." He respected that, more than he could say. They finished breakfast in silence, and Eleanor began clearing the dishes. Caleb moved to help, but she waved him off. "I've got it." "You should get ready for work." He hesitated. "You sure?" She glanced over with a slight smile. "You letting me stay doesn't mean you're responsible for everything under this roof." Caleb looked down at the table, lips pressing into a tight line. "That's not how I was raised." "Then maybe we'll just have to raise each other a little differently," she said softly. He left without replying. The mill's whistle echoed across the valley by mid-morning. Caleb didn't hear it. He was already walking the ridge road behind the mill, his mind knotted. Eleanor was right. This wasn't just a matter of shelter anymore. Her presence lingered like a question in every room. It was unsettling and unfamiliar. At lunchtime, he sat outside the mill with his thermos, watching the clouds move like slow ships over the mountains. That's when Tom Larrabee sat down beside him, one of the few in town who spoke plainly, without needing to weigh every word. "Heard you've got company at the cottage," Tom said, unwrapping his bread. "Word travels fast." "In this town, it gallops," Tom grinned. "Pretty teacher and a daughter, yeah?" Caleb didn't answer. "May Pritchard stopped by my sister's. Said the pastor's got you playing house." He looked sideways at Caleb. "That true?" She needed a place to sleep. Tom took a slow bite, chewed. "You don't owe anyone an explanation, Caleb. But this town, it writes its own stories if you don't hand them the script." "I'm not interested in stories." "Then tell them the truth. Before someone else does it for you." Caleb said nothing for a long moment. When he finally stood, Tom added quietly, "You okay with her being there?" Caleb paused. "I don't know." Tom nodded once. "That's something at least." Back at the cottage, Eleanor sat on the porch steps with a cloth bundle in her lap. She looked up as Caleb walked the path from the mill, sweat on his brow and dust on his sleeves. "I patched the tear in your work shirt," she said, rising. "It was in the laundry basket." "You didn't have to." "I know." She handed it to him, clean, neatly folded, stitched with care. Caleb looked at it for a moment, then at her. "Thank you." They stood there, the porch between them, the light shifting through the trees like water. Becky peeked through the screen door. "Mama, can we go to the creek after supper?" Eleanor glanced back. "If the weather holds." Becky nodded and disappeared again. Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "She's adjusting fast. She's used to change. That's not always good." "No," Eleanor agreed, her voice quieter now. "But sometimes it makes you strong in the places where others fall apart." He didn't have an answer for that. She stepped back toward the door. "There's stew warming on the stove." "You're welcome to join us." He hesitated. "Maybe I will." And that night, for the first time in 5 years, the cottage didn't feel like a place to endure. It felt, just slightly, like a place to stay. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. The bell above the mercantile door gave a soft jingle as Eleanor stepped inside, Becky trailing behind her with wide eyes and a cautious grip on her mother's skirt. The store smelled of old cedar and burlap, with sunbeams filtering through the front windows and catching dust in the air like floating fireflies. Shelves lined with folded muslin, buttons, dry goods, and hand-labeled jars created the sense that everything here had a story. Eleanor took a steadying breath and approached the counter. Behind it stood Virginia Halford, owner, record keeper, and reigning queen of Willow Creek's whispered truths. She wore a brooch, shaped like a magnolia, and peered over her spectacles as Eleanor approached, offering a polite but not warm smile. "You're the teacher from Asheville," Virginia said, eyes flicking briefly to Becky, then back. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned you might come by." "I was hoping to ask about work," Eleanor replied, voice calm, even. "Short-term, part-time, anything helpful, really?" "I can take inventory, run the books, clean, organize." "I already have a girl who sweeps," Virginia interrupted. "Mabel's niece. But bookkeeping." She squinted. "You any good with numbers?" "I taught arithmetic to a class of 25 8-year-olds. I'd say that counts for something." That earned the faintest smirk from Virginia. "We'll see." "You can start this afternoon. Organize the back ledgers and dust the shelves behind the counter. We'll go from there." "Thank you," Eleanor said. But Virginia wasn't looking at her anymore. Her gaze had shifted toward the front window, where a pair of women had gathered just outside, their eyes fixed on the door. One of them whispered something and turned away, lips pursed, arms folded tight. Eleanor felt the shift, the heat behind her ears. Virginia adjusted her glasses. "Small town," she said, almost kindly. "You get used to people watching." "I stopped worrying about what people thought the day I buried my husband," Eleanor replied. Virginia gave a short nod. "Good. You'll need that." Later that day, Eleanor returned to the cottage just before dusk, her shoulders aching but her head clear. The scent of stew met her at the door, and she paused, surprised. Becky rushed to greet her, arms wide. "Mama, Mr. Caleb made supper." Eleanor raised an eyebrow as she stepped inside. "Did he now?" Caleb stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot on the stove, sleeves rolled to the elbows. "Don't expect much. Just potatoes and broth." Figured it was my turn. She watched him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Thank you." Becky danced into the room, already pulling out chairs. "We picked herbs from the garden. I got dirt on my shoes, but Mr. Caleb said it was okay." "He did he?" Eleanor gave Caleb a mock-stern look. "Well, I guess I can't argue with generosity." They ate around the small table, conversation light and slow, like stones skipping across water. Caleb didn't speak much, but when he did, his words had weight. Eleanor asked about the mill. Caleb asked about the store. Becky filled in every gap with tales about bugs and songs and the mystery of how frogs disappeared in the rain. After dinner, as Becky washed her hands in the basin, Eleanor leaned against the counter beside Caleb. "She's starting to sleep better," she said. "That's so. She didn't used to," Eleanor said. "Not after. Not for a long time." Caleb waited. "My husband was sick for months. She saw too much of it, got used to hospitals and whispers in hallways. After he passed, I had to sleep with one hand on her back every night, just so she'd know I hadn't disappeared too." Her voice caught at the end, and she looked away, blinking fast. Caleb didn't offer pity, just presence. Sometimes that was the more merciful thing. "I'm glad she's got a little light in her again," he said after a long pause. "She likes you," Eleanor said. "I noticed. She trusts quiet people, says they carry their stories better." Caleb's lips lifted at the corner. "Is that so?" Eleanor turned, facing him more fully. "I know I'm a guest here, and I know people talk. But I want you to know, I didn't come here looking to be anyone's problem, or savior, or secret. I never took you for any of those. Then what do you take me for?" The question came out quieter than she meant it to. Too vulnerable. She hated that. Caleb looked at her. Really looked. His eyes were grey-blue, like a storm trying to remember how to be sky. "I don't know yet," he said. "But you don't feel like a stranger anymore." Something shifted between them, barely, like the faint sound of a window opening down the hall. Later that evening, as Eleanor folded Becky's laundry, she found something small at the bottom of the hamper. A wooden rabbit, smoothed by years of handling. She held it for a long moment, brushing her thumb over its back. It wasn't Becky's. It wasn't hers. She placed it gently on the dresser by Becky's bed. Caleb was on the porch, rocking slowly in the chair Emma once claimed as her own. The night was warm, crickets humming low in the grass. Eleanor stepped outside, arms crossed over her chest. "She found the rabbit," she said. He didn't look up. "I should have put it away." "She likes it." He nodded. There was a long stretch of silence before she spoke again. "You ever think maybe people come into your life because you're both carrying something you can't put down alone?" His hand tightened around the armrest. "Sometimes." She moved to lean against the post beside him. "I don't believe in accidents anymore," she said. "Or luck, or fate, really, just timing. And whether or not you're willing to open the door when someone knocks." Caleb turned to look at her. "I opened the door," he said quietly. "You did." They sat there, two shadows in the night, not touching, not speaking, just letting the stillness say everything it needed to. Inside, Becky was already asleep, the rabbit tucked beside her. Outside, the stars blinked awake one by one, as if to listen. The morning fog was slow to lift, lingering low over the hills like a memory refusing to leave. Caleb stepped outside, adjusting the collar of his work shirt, and paused on the porch. The scent of bread drifted through the open kitchen window. It shouldn't have caught him off guard by now. Eleanor was always up before him, moving quietly through the house as if she were afraid to fully inhabit it. But this morning felt different. He didn't know why. Eleanor's voice floated through the air, soft and even, reading to Becky in the front room. He didn't catch the words, just the cadence, the kind a mother used when she wanted a child to feel safe. Caleb hadn't heard that tone in years. Not since Emma. And yet it didn't ache this time. It settled differently, low in his chest, warm and unwelcome. He stepped off the porch, boots finding the path with the same certainty they always had. The workday was waiting, and he needed it, needed the clatter and sweat and rhythm of routine to keep him from thinking too hard about the quiet weight of Eleanor Walker in his home. But the image stayed with him all morning. Her voice, the way she placed Becky's shoes by the door, the way she folded dish towels as if care was a kind of prayer. At lunch, Tom Larrabee wandered over to him, beneath the old mill awning. The men were sitting on overturned crates and barrels, peeling boiled eggs and passing around canteens. "Town's been talking," Tom said, biting into a biscuit. "Heard from Virginia that the teacher's taken up permanent residence with you." Caleb didn't look up. "That so? You planning on keeping her there without a ring?" The air between them went still. Caleb set down his sandwich slowly, deliberate. "She's a guest. Not my business what folks choose to believe." Tom wiped his hands on his pants. "Maybe not, but you know how people are, especially May Pritchard. She's been saying you've let your grief twist into foolishness." Caleb looked up now, slow and steady. "May Pritchard's had something to say about me since the day I stopped attending her Sunday potlucks." Tom gave a snort of laughter. "She says Eleanor's hiding something. That a woman like her doesn't end up in a town like this without a past catching up." Caleb's jaw flexed, but he didn't speak. Tom leaned in slightly. "You trust her?" "I don't need to," Caleb said. "I gave her shelter, not my name." Tom studied him. "Still, people notice when a man keeps something that looks like a family but says it's not." That night, the air turned colder. A storm was settling in over the ridge, and the wind tugged at the windows. Eleanor was sewing by lamplight, her fingers moving quick and neat over a tear in Becky's sleeve. Caleb sat by the fire, polishing a rusted hinge for the barn door. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't settled either. "I saw May in town today," Eleanor said without looking up. Caleb's hands paused. "Did she say something?" "Only with her eyes." Eleanor smiled faintly, and with the way she talked about the weather like it was scandalous. He let out a low breath. "She'll stir the pot till the spoon breaks." "I'm not worried," Eleanor said. "People like May hold on to their opinions like heirlooms. They don't change, they just get passed down." She looked at him then, the needle pausing in her hand. "But if it becomes a problem for you, I can make other arrangements." "You're not a problem," Caleb said too fast. Their eyes met and held. Eleanor softened her voice. "Even if folks think it looks improper?" He didn't answer right away. The fire crackled softly between them. "I lost a son," he said, voice low, raw. "Not a day goes by. I don't wonder if I could have done something. Worked less, stayed home, been there when the fire started. Emma sent him to that school because I couldn't afford to keep him close." Eleanor's hand slowly lowered, the needle forgotten. "I buried him in my heart, not because they found him, but because they didn't," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the flames. Then you and Becky walked in. And suddenly I hear laughter again. I see toys in corners. I hear dishes clink in the sink. I feel like there's breath in this house again. Eleanor's eyes welled. She didn't speak, just let the truth hang there between them, thick and trembling. "You're not a problem," he said again. "You're the first thing that's felt like peace in years." The room fell into a soft hush. Outside, the wind picked up. Becky called from the hallway. "Mama?" Eleanor turned. "Yes, baby?" "I can't find my rabbit." Eleanor blinked, confused. Your rabbit? Caleb stood, his heart jumping. She means the one on the dresser. Eleanor looked at him, slowly rising. She brought it into her room? He nodded, already heading down the hall. In Becky's room, the lamp was still on. She sat on the edge of the bed in her nightgown, covers folded neatly back. The wooden rabbit was gone. I had it right here, she said, pointing to the pillow. They searched, beneath the bed, in the hallway, near the porch. But it didn't turn up. I didn't take it outside, Becky said, eyes wide. I just wanted it to sleep next to me. It felt like a wish. Caleb knelt in front of her. We'll find it. Maybe it slipped behind the dresser. But as he reassured her, his mind was already somewhere else. That rabbit had a name carved faintly on the bottom. William. He'd carved it for his son the day before the boy left for school. No one else had ever seen that name etched into the wood. He'd kept it hidden, personal, sacred. If Eleanor saw it. When Becky finally drifted off, Eleanor met him in the hallway, her voice quiet. That wasn't just a toy, was it? He shook his head. She waited. But he didn't explain. Was William your son? She asked. The question wrapped around him like a memory. Caleb didn't answer. Instead, he walked past her into the night air, letting the door shut softly behind him. Eleanor stood alone in the hallway, her hands clenched at her sides. She hadn't told him yet. She hadn't told him she recognized that name from a file years ago. She hadn't told him. She thought William might still be alive. The morning broke grey and heavy. Clouds hung low over the hills, casting a pale, washed-out light over the cottage. Eleanor stood in the doorway with a cup of tea cooling in her hands, watching Caleb work in the yard. He moved with quiet precision, stacking firewood beside the shed, each motion deliberate, as if he were trying to keep his mind tethered to something solid. He hadn't spoken much since last night. Not about the rabbit. Not about William. He hadn't asked her why she knew the name. Eleanor sipped from her cup, but the tea had gone bitter. She set it down on the railing and folded her arms, drawing her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She knew this moment would come. She'd felt it approaching from the first night she stepped into his home, like the rumble of a train still miles down the track. But it didn't make it any easier to face. Becky appeared beside her, still in her nightdress, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Did he find the rabbit? Not yet, sweetheart. Becky leaned into her side. He looked sad last night. Eleanor brushed a hand through her daughter's hair. Sometimes grown-ups carry sadness the way children carry questions. Quietly. All the time. Becky looked up. Do you carry sadness too? Eleanor didn't answer right away. Her throat tightened. She crouched down, meeting her daughter's eyes. Sometimes, she said. But when I hold your hand, it gets a little lighter. Becky smiled and wrapped her arms around her neck. Eleanor closed her eyes and held on. When she stepped back inside, Caleb was standing by the kitchen table, dirt still on his boots, the lost rabbit in his hand. He held it gently, like something fragile. The name on the bottom had been scuffed, but not lost. Eleanor didn't need to see it to remember. I found it behind the porch swing, he said. Guess the wind carried it. She nodded, unsure how to begin. I carved this for him the day before he left, Caleb said, his voice distant. He didn't want to go. Emma said it was only for a few weeks, just until we could afford better care. He'd had that cough for months, and the doctor said the mountain air might help. He looked at Eleanor. They said the fire started in the kitchen wing. The teachers got most of the children out. But William was never found. The bodies. They couldn't identify them all. Eleanor stepped forward, each word in her chest like a drumbeat. I used to volunteer with the state placement office, she said, before Becky was born. Just part-time, helping with school records, sending supplies. There was a child, this was years ago, in Harrisburg. Quiet, maybe 6. He didn't speak for a long time. But one day he told another boy that his name used to be William, said his dad carved animals. Caleb's hands tightened around the rabbit. Harrisburg's a long way. I know, she said softly. And it might not be him, but I never forgot that boy. He had a crescent-shaped scar right behind his left ear. Faint, but clear. He said he liked rabbits because they didn't need to speak to be heard. Caleb sat down slowly, like his legs had lost their strength. I didn't say anything because I wasn't sure, Eleanor whispered. And because if I was wrong, I didn't want to reopen something you'd buried. He looked at her, eyes unreadable. You think my son might be alive? She nodded. I think there's a chance. The silence between them stretched until the clock ticked once. Then again. Finally Caleb spoke, his voice rough. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I didn't know if I had the right, she said. This is your grief, Caleb, your life. I was a stranger who stumbled into it. You're not a stranger, he said. Eleanor blinked. Then what am I? Caleb looked at her, really looked, and something in his face changed, softened. You're the first person who ever asked if I wanted to keep remembering. Everyone else just told me to forget. The rain started a moment later, soft, almost polite, tapping against the windows. I wrote to the orphanage in Knoxville last week, Eleanor said. Asked if they had records, just in case. No one's responded yet. You think that's where he is now? I don't know, she said, but I can write again. I can go there if I have to. He stood slowly, setting the rabbit back on the table. We'll go. If there's even a chance. His voice caught, and he turned away. Eleanor stepped toward him, her voice low. We'll find out. Together. Caleb didn't answer, but he didn't walk away. Later that evening, Ruth Holloway stopped by with fresh bread and a look that said she knew far more than she'd been told. You both look like you've seen a ghost, she said, setting the basket on the counter. Eleanor gave her a tired smile. Just chasing one. Ruth looked between them, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folded note. This came to the church. I think it was meant for you. Eleanor unfolded it slowly. Her hands trembled. It was from St. Augustine's Home for Boys in Knoxville. A short, formal reply. A boy by the name of Daniel was placed with them 3 years ago. Age approximate to 6 at arrival. Crescent birthmark confirmed. Now living with a foster family outside the city. Caleb read over her shoulder. His breath hitched. The rabbit sat on the table between them. A small, carved hope. And now, maybe, a way back to the boy who once held it in his hands. The house was still when Caleb rose the next morning. The kind of still that pressed in around the ears, not with silence, but with waiting. The letter from St. Augustine's sat folded on the table where they'd left it. The corners curled just slightly from the damp in the air. Eleanor was already outside, tending to the small herb patch along the side of the house, her hands working through the soil with the same quiet focus she seemed to give everything. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching her. The soft morning light caught in the loose strands of her hair, and there was something about the shape of her shoulders, the rhythm of her movements, that grounded him. She didn't ask for anything. Didn't expect him to speak, but she was present, anchoring him to something that felt dangerously close to hope. Becky was still asleep. A rare morning without her endless questions bouncing through the kitchen. "You didn't sleep much," Eleanor said without looking up. "I don't think I did," Caleb admitted. She pulled a weed from between two sprigs of rosemary and set it aside. "You were up when I came out here." He didn't answer. Finally, she turned toward him, wiping her hands on her skirt. "We need to write back." He nodded. "I know. They didn't give us much to go on. No surname. Just a town outside Knoxville and a birthmark." She hesitated. "That could mean 100 boys." "Could," he said. "But I don't think it does." Eleanor stepped closer, brushing dirt from her fingertips. "Why not?" "Because I remember what it felt like to hold that boy's hand. And when I read that letter, I swear to God it felt like something grabbed mine back." Her eyes softened, but she didn't speak, just reached out and touched his arm, light and brief. Inside, Becky stirred, calling sleepily for her mother. Eleanor gave a small smile. "You write the letter?" "I'll make breakfast." By late afternoon, the letter was done, folded neatly in Caleb's handwriting, sealed with trembling fingers. He'd rewritten it 3 times before settling on the final version. Direct, respectful, but aching in every line. "I believe the boy you call Daniel may be my son. I lost him in a fire 5 years ago. He was never found, but I remember the birthmark. I remember the rabbit. If you'll allow it, I'd like to come meet him. Just a conversation. Nothing more unless he wants it." They mailed it together. Caleb insisted on walking the 3 miles to the post office with Eleanor and Becky beside him. The wind tugged at their coats as they stepped up to the red wooden door, Caleb pressing the envelope into the clerk's hand like it was made of glass. Eleanor looked up at him as they stepped outside. "You all right?" "I don't know what I am," he said. "But I know I'm not standing still anymore." That evening, Ruth Holloway stopped by again, bringing a basket of plum preserves and a look that cut through the front porch light like a chisel. "You told him?" she asked Eleanor quietly, after Becky had gone inside. "Yes." "And?" "He's holding himself together like rope soaked in rain. Strong enough, but stretched too thin." Ruth glanced toward the porch window where Caleb sat just inside, staring at the rabbit on the mantel. "He'll need you," Ruth said softly. Eleanor met her eyes. "I don't know what I am to him." Ruth placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes being what someone needs is more honest than being what they expect." Eleanor nodded, but doubt clung to her ribs like frost. When Ruth left, the house grew quiet again. Eleanor found Caleb standing in the hallway, holding a photograph she hadn't seen before. It was faded, edges curled, but the image was clear enough. Emma, smiling gently, and a boy about 5, curly-haired, eyes bright with curiosity. "This is the only one I kept out," he said. "There were others, but this one I could never pack away." Eleanor took it carefully, as if the photo might melt in her hands. "He looks like you." He had her smile. She looked up. "What would you say to him? If it's him? If you saw him?" Caleb's throat worked, but no words came. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe I'd just sit with him. Let him speak first. Let him tell me what he needs. And if he doesn't remember you, then I'll still know." They stood there for a long time. Later, as night fell, and Becky lay asleep in her room, Eleanor stepped onto the porch. Caleb joined her a moment later, hands in his pockets. "They said the family he's with lives just outside the city. she murmured. Maybe a farm. Maybe quiet. Like here? Caleb nodded. I wonder if he's happy. I hope so, she said. But I also hope he still wonders. Caleb turned toward her then, something raw in his gaze. And what about you? What about me? Why are you still here? The question struck deeper than he intended. Eleanor drew in a slow breath. I came here to escape the pieces I didn't know how to carry anymore. But lately, it feels like those pieces might actually fit somewhere again. Caleb stepped closer. In this house? In this life, she whispered. The porch light flickered gently, casting their shadows long against the wall behind them. Eleanor, he said, voice low, rough. She looked up. I don't know how to do this. Any of it. Loving again, hoping again. She smiled, small and sad. Neither do I. But I think I want to try. Eleanor's breath caught. Then she nodded. And under the hush of mountain wind, with a letter now gone and a path uncertain, something between them finally opened. Not a promise, not yet, but a door. The days passed with an uneasy stillness, as if time itself was holding its breath. Every morning, Caleb checked the mailbox at the edge of the property, and every morning it was empty, except for the usual stack of supply orders and farm notices. He'd stand there a moment longer than needed, pretending to sort through papers, pretending he wasn't searching for a letter that might rewrite everything. Eleanor didn't ask. She simply watched from the porch, knowing the weight he carried in his chest. It showed in his shoulders, in the way he stirred his coffee without drinking it, in how his eyes drifted toward the horizon when he thought no one was watching. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the ridge and painted the valley in gold and amber, Becky danced barefoot in the yard, singing softly to herself, stringing wildflowers into a crooked crown. Caleb stood on the porch, carving another rabbit from a scrap of soft pine. His hands moved slow, careful, tracing the shape from memory. She's blooming here, Eleanor said, stepping up beside him. Caleb looked at Becky and nodded. She is. I think it's because she feels safe. He glanced sideways. And you? Eleanor didn't answer right away. She leaned against the post and looked out over the garden. Most days, yes. Some days, I feel like I'm waiting to be told I've overstayed. He set the carving down and turned to her, voice quiet but sure. You haven't. She smiled, just barely. Then why haven't you asked me to stay? Really stay? He exhaled slowly, pressing his fingers against the wood grain. Because I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. Not a home, not a promise, not your heart. I already gave you most of those, she whispered. The rest just needs time to catch up. Their eyes met, and something stirred between them again, soft but unmistakable. Not the rush of young love, but the quiet, grounded gravity of two people who had learned, through pain, how much every choice mattered. The next morning, Caleb made the walk to the mailbox again. Only this time, something was there. A cream envelope with a Knoxville postmark. His name, written in careful script. He held it in both hands for a long moment before opening it. Inside, the letter was short. Formal, but it held everything. Daniel is doing well. His foster parents speak highly of him. He is quiet, but thoughtful. He has a fondness for animals. Most notably, he still carries a carved rabbit, says it was the only thing he had when he arrived. He asked recently about his father, asked if he was still looking. If you wish to visit, we believe it would be appropriate. He's been asking the kind of questions that only you might answer. Caleb read the last line again, then again. He's been asking the kind of questions that only you might answer. He walked back to the house, slower than usual, like every step had to land in truth. Eleanor was in the kitchen, slicing apples for a pie, the scent of cinnamon already warming the room. She looked up, saw his face, and set the knife down gently. "Is it him?" "I think so," Caleb said. "They say he still has the rabbit." Eleanor stepped around the counter. "What did they say about visiting?" "He wants to meet," Caleb said, his voice catching. "He's been asking if I'm still looking." A moment passed. Eleanor reached out and took his hand. He didn't let go. "Then we go," she said simply, "as soon as they'll have us." They sent the reply that evening. Ruth helped arrange the train tickets the next morning, quietly, carefully, telling the station master it was for a family visit. No one needed to know the full truth. Not yet. Not until the story finished writing itself. The night before the trip, Caleb sat alone in William's old room, now Becky's. He ran his fingers along the shelf where the rabbit had once sat. Beside it now was a small drawing Becky had made. 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a tree. One tall, one with curls, one in between. She'd written their names beneath it in crooked letters. Mama, me, Mr. Caleb. His throat tightened. He hadn't asked for this life, but it had found him anyway. Behind him, Eleanor stood quietly in the doorway. "You nervous?" she asked. "Terrified," he admitted. She walked to him, kneeling beside the bed. "You're not walking into a courtroom. You're walking towards someone who's already wondering if he belongs to you." He looked down at her. "And what if he doesn't remember me?" "Then you'll remind him," she said, "with patience, with truth. And with that rabbit, if you have to." He laughed softly, a sound that surprised them both. She reached for his hand and held it between both of hers. "You're not alone in this. You don't have to carry the whole weight." "I've been carrying it for so long," he whispered. "I know," she said, tears touching her lashes. "But I'm here now. Let me carry some." That night, neither of them slept much. Becky curled up in her bed without complaint, sensing the weight in the air, the kind that made even children quiet. And just before dawn, as the sky turned pale blue and the train whistle echoed faintly in the valley, Caleb stood on the porch with a small satchel, the rabbit tucked gently inside. Eleanor joined him, Becky in her arms, half asleep and humming. They looked at the horizon together, the morning stretching wide before them. A journey was beginning. Not just toward a boy who might be a son, but toward something even harder to reclaim, faith that love, once lost, could still find its way home. The train cut through the valley like a thread sewing 2 lives together, one remembered, one waiting. Caleb sat stiff-backed beside the window, his hands folded in his lap, eyes locked on the blur of trees and fence posts. He hadn't spoken much since they left Willow Creek, not beyond the essentials. But Eleanor knew better than to fill the silence. Some things needed space to breathe. Across from them, Becky dozed against Eleanor's shoulder, her thumb still tucked beneath the blanket, the wooden rabbit held loosely in her lap. Caleb had given it to her before they left, pressing it into her palm without a word. She'd understood, even without explanation. "Do you want to practice what you'll say?" Eleanor asked gently, voice low enough not to wake Becky. Caleb's jaw flexed. "I've thought about that 100 times. And? Everything sounds wrong in my head. Too much or too little. What do you say to a child who might be yours but barely knows your face?" "You tell the truth," she said. And then you listen. He turned his head slowly to look at her. You make it sound easy. It's not, she admitted. But if there's one thing I've learned from Becky, it's that children don't remember perfect words. They remember the feeling of safety, of being seen. The corners of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. I don't know if I'm still capable of offering that. You are, she said. You already have. The train whistled as it pulled into the edge of Knoxville. They gathered their things in quiet rhythm. The letter from St. Augustine's had included an address, a farmhouse a few miles outside the city, where Daniel now lived with a foster couple named the Martins. The letter had said little about the family, only that they were kind, stable, and had no children of their own. Caleb stepped onto the platform first, offering a hand to help Eleanor down. She took it, her grip steady, but the moment lingered, just long enough for him to feel the weight of trust there. A hired carriage took them the last few miles. The road wound through rolling hills, past fences in need of mending and fields starting to turn gold with the promise of autumn. The farmhouse came into view just past a bend, whitewashed, modest, with a red barn to the right and a tire swing swaying slowly in the breeze. The carriage pulled to a stop, and Caleb just sat there, staring at the porch. You don't have to do it alone, Eleanor whispered. I'm not sure I can do it at all. You already are. He stepped down, his boots landing in the dust like the first lines of a prayer. Becky slipped her hand into Eleanor's, watching him with wide, curious eyes. Caleb reached into his satchel and pulled out the rabbit, now polished smooth from years of handling. He held it tightly. The door opened and a woman stepped out, middle-aged, her face warm but guarded. A man followed, tall, clean-shaven, with a quiet steadiness in his step. They paused when they saw the visitors. Mr. Mercer? The woman asked. Caleb nodded. Yes. I'm Mary Martin. This is my husband, Paul. Eleanor stepped forward, introducing herself and Becky. Mary smiled gently at the girl, then looked back to Caleb. He's out back, she said, feeding the hens. He does that every morning, even on Sundays. Caleb's voice caught in his throat. Does he know we're here? We told him someone was coming who might have known him from before, Mary said. We didn't say more than that. We thought it would be kinder if it came from you. He nodded slowly. Eleanor reached out and touched his arm. I'll wait here with Becky. Caleb gave her one long, grateful look before following Paul around the side of the house. They walked in silence until the barn came into view. Beyond it, near the chicken coop, a boy knelt in the grass, scattering feed from a tin pail. He was taller than Caleb remembered. Thinner, but the shape of his shoulders, the slight turn of his head when he listened, it stopped Caleb in his tracks. That's him, Paul said quietly. Caleb took a slow breath, then stepped forward. The boy looked up. His eyes were blue and familiar. You Daniel? Caleb asked. The boy nodded, cautious. Yes, sir. Caleb knelt slowly, keeping a small distance between them. My name's Caleb Mercer. Daniel's brow furrowed. That name sounds... I think I've heard it. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the rabbit. He held it out in his open palm. You remember this? Daniel stared, his mouth parted, but no words came. He reached out slowly and took it, turning it over in his hands. His thumb found the worn groove behind the ear, his old habit, Caleb remembered, and he traced it without thinking. I used to have one like this, he said. You didn't have one like it, Caleb said softly. You had this one. Daniel looked up, eyes wide. You made it? I did. For your 5th birthday. The boy blinked hard, chest rising and falling too fast. My head. Sometimes I forget things. But this, I kept it with me. Always. I never stopped looking for you, Caleb whispered, voice cracking. Not once. Daniel's chin trembled. He stepped forward just a little. Did you... He hesitated. Did you sing to me? Something about the wind? Caleb nodded, tears catching in his throat. That was your favorite. You said it made you feel brave. Daniel's lips pressed together. Can you still sing it? Caleb closed his eyes and began, voice rough and low, barely a melody. Wind through the trees, sing to my son, rest now your heart, day's work is done. Daniel took a step closer, then another. Then he was there, right there, his arms wrapping tight around Caleb's neck. Caleb held him finally as the wind moved gently through the fields. Back at the house, Eleanor looked out and saw them. She didn't cry, not yet. She simply knelt beside Becky, pressing a kiss to her forehead and whispered, "He found his way back." Becky looked up. "So, does that mean we have a boy now too?" Eleanor laughed softly, her voice thick. "Maybe." The door behind them creaked open as Mary stepped out, wiping her eyes. Inside the house, a place was being set at the table. One more chair, a name remembered, and a family beginning again. The train rocked gently beneath them as it cut through the hills, dragging its shadow across meadows dusted in early autumn light. Caleb sat by the window, his reflection flickering in and out against the glass. Daniel was asleep on the bench across from him, curled into Eleanor's side, his head resting lightly against her arm. Becky had her feet tucked beneath her, her hand resting protectively over Daniel's. Caleb hadn't spoken in some time, not since they left the Martins' farm that morning. He couldn't. Every word felt too small. The ache in his chest wasn't pain anymore. It was something quieter. He kept glancing at Daniel, trying to convince himself the boy was real. And he was. Real and warm, and breathing steady like a rhythm Caleb had once known by heart. Eleanor looked across the car at him. She didn't speak either, but her eyes, soft, steady, held him in place when his thoughts threatened to drift too far. The letter sat in his pocket. Mary Martin had handed it to him before they left, folded with care, sealed in plain brown paper. He wrote it last month, she'd said. Said he was ready to ask the questions. Just didn't know where to send them. Caleb had read it 3 times that morning, each line pressed deeper than the last. Dear Dad, if you're still out there, I just want to know if you miss me. If you still think about me. Sometimes I dream about your voice. I think you used to sing. I think you smelled like cedar. I think I loved you. I hope you're still looking. Because I'm still here. Your boy, Daniel. But I think I used to be William. The train hissed as it slowed into Willow Creek. The children stirred as the wheels screeched against the track, and Eleanor gently shook Daniel awake. We're here, she whispered. Caleb stood, suddenly aware of his hands trembling. He reached down and steadied Becky as she stood. As they stepped onto the platform, the air met them cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and chimney smoke. Home, or what home was becoming. Ruth Holloway stood at the edge of the platform, hands clasped, her smile trembling. When she saw the boy beside Caleb, she put a hand to her chest. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't believe it, she whispered. Caleb stepped forward, his hand resting lightly on Daniel's shoulder. Neither do I. But here we are. Ruth crouched and looked into Daniel's face. Well, my goodness, you've got your father's eyes. Daniel didn't flinch. He just nodded solemnly. I think I remember you. I was there the day you were christened, Ruth said. You tried to eat the candle. Becky giggled, and Daniel cracked the tiniest smile. Back at the cottage, the porch looked smaller than Caleb remembered. Maybe it was because the weight that once sat inside him had finally shifted. He stood at the door for a long moment before opening it. Inside, the house was exactly the same, but everything had changed. Daniel stepped cautiously through the doorway, eyes scanning every detail. His hand drifted toward the shelf in the corner, where the second rabbit, unfinished, rested beside Becky's drawing. Caleb followed him, heart thick in his chest. I started carving that one the day we left for the school, he said. I never finished it. Daniel reached out, fingers hovering. Can I? It's yours. He lifted it gently, then turned to Caleb. Do you still carve? Not much, Caleb said. Will you teach me? The words landed like a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Caleb nodded slowly. Yeah, I think I will. That night, the table felt full, truly full, for the first time in years. Becky and Daniel passed the breadbasket back and forth like it was a game, whispering and giggling over something only they understood. Eleanor moved between the table and the stove, her cheeks flushed, her eyes brighter than Caleb had ever seen them. After dinner, while the children played on the porch, Eleanor stood beside the sink, drying dishes as Caleb rinsed. He glanced at her, then away. I keep waiting for the part where this all falls apart. It won't, she said. You don't know that. No, she said. But I know what it feels like when something's worth holding on to, even if it's uncertain. This, she glanced toward the porch, this is worth the risk. He leaned against the counter, the rag in his hands forgotten. You brought him back to me, he said. Not just to this house, to me. You brought him back, she said. You never stopped hoping. I did, he admitted. For a while, I let him go. Eleanor shook her head. You let go of pain. That's different. You never let go of love. The screen door creaked open, and Daniel stepped inside, holding the rabbit in both hands. Is it okay if I sleep with this? He asked. Caleb swallowed hard. Of course. The boy hesitated, then added, Will you say the song? Caleb looked at Eleanor, then knelt beside him. Wind through the trees. Sing to my son, he began softly. Rest now your heart. Day's work is done. Daniel leaned into his shoulder, and Caleb wrapped his arm around him. When the boy finally slipped off to bed, Eleanor turned to Caleb, voice barely a whisper. You're his father. I'm not sure I deserve that title. You do, she said. You walked through fire to find him. He looked at her, and in the hush between their breaths, he saw her. Not just the woman who'd brought light back into his house, but the one who had carried hope for him when he'd forgotten how. I don't know how to thank you, he said. You don't have to. But he stepped closer anyway, his voice quiet. Stay. She looked at him, eyes wide. Eleanor, I know this didn't start as anything real between us, but it became real. You made it real. She stood there, breath catching, heart stammering. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, Caleb said, but when you're ready, if you're ready, I'd like to make this house your home too, for good. Eleanor blinked back tears. She didn't speak. She just reached for his hand, and held on. Morning broke with the kind of golden light that made everything feel possible. The cottage smelled of cinnamon and firewood, with soft laughter echoing from the porch. Caleb stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Eleanor and the children work on something strange and wonderful. 2 wooden picture frames Becky insisted they needed to make, so we can all be in this house together, even when we're at school or work or dreaming. Eleanor guided their hands gently as they glued twine around the edges. Daniel focused carefully, his tongue tucked at the corner of his mouth, while Becky sang softly under her breath. The sight made something in Caleb's chest ache, the kind of ache that had nothing to do with loss and everything to do with fullness. He stepped outside, tucking a folded letter into his shirt pocket. He hadn't told Eleanor yet. He needed to, but he hadn't. Not yet. "Those frames look better than half the things hanging in the church," Caleb said, leaning against the post with a grin. Eleanor looked up and smiled, brushing sawdust off her skirt. "You're just saying that because you didn't have to help cut the twine. I trust your hands more than mine." Becky lifted her frame proudly. "We're putting them by the door, so everybody who comes over knows this is our family." Daniel looked up, uncertain. "Even me?" Becky frowned. "Of course you. You're the middle one." "The middle what?" he asked. She shrugged. "Just the middle. Not the oldest, not the baby. That means you're the strongest." "Right, Mama?" Eleanor touched his shoulder. "It means you've got a place. Right where you belong." Daniel glanced toward Caleb, then back at the frame. "I never had one before. A place, I mean." "You do now," Caleb said. That afternoon, while the children played out near the fence, Eleanor found Caleb on the porch swing, the letter in his hands. He didn't hear her come up until her shadow crossed his lap. "What is it?" He hesitated, then handed her the envelope. "Came in yesterday." From the school board. She unfolded the paper slowly, her eyes moving across the lines. Her breath caught. "They want me," she said. "The teaching position. Permanent. They said your time in Asheville and your volunteer work in the county office made a strong impression," Caleb said. "They even talked to Ruth." Eleanor let out a soft laugh of disbelief. "It's real?" "It is." She sat beside him, the letter trembling slightly in her hands. "I never thought I'd find it here. A job, a home. Future." "I didn't either," he said quietly. "But you made all of it possible." She looked at him then, her expression shifting. "So what happens now?" Caleb swallowed. "That depends. On whether you see this as home, too, not just a stop on the way to something else." Eleanor folded the letter and looked out toward the children. "You once told me you didn't want me to feel like I owed you anything." "I remember. Well, now I do." He turned to her. "Eleanor, I owe you the truth, all of it." Her voice wavered. "I didn't just come to Willow Creek looking for a job. I came because I saw your name in an old case file, and I remembered the boy, the one who wouldn't speak, the one who clung to that rabbit like it was the only real thing in his world." Caleb blinked. "I knew it might be your son. I didn't know for sure. I told myself I just needed to see for myself, and then go." He said nothing. "But the moment we stepped into this house, it stopped being about proving something. It became about belonging. And the longer I stayed, the more I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd think I'd manipulated you." Caleb looked away, his jaw tight. Eleanor reached for his hand. "I never meant to take anything from you. I just didn't want to leave before I gave you the chance you never had." The chance to know. The porch creaked softly beneath them. I don't know what to say, Caleb admitted. You don't have to say anything yet. I just needed you to know that before you ask me anything more. He looked at her, heart pulled in every direction. You gave me back my son, he said finally. I don't know how to hold a grudge against that. I didn't do it alone, but you were the one who kept looking. When I stopped believing. Eleanor's eyes brimmed with something deeper than guilt, something more fragile. He leaned in slightly. When I asked you to stay, it wasn't out of gratitude. It wasn't to repay a debt. I asked because when I think of this home, when I think of the rest of my life, I see you in it. She breathed in slowly. Even now. Especially now. The screen door banged open, and Becky came running across the porch, out of breath. Daniel says he found a turtle, but he needs help getting it into the bucket without hurting it. Caleb smiled. Sounds like a family emergency. Eleanor stood and followed him down the steps. Let's go see what we're rescuing. But as they walked toward the fence, Caleb reached for her hand. And this time, she didn't let go. The wind picked up slightly, carrying the scent of earth and sun and wood smoke. It smelled like home. The first frost of the season arrived overnight, leaving a shimmer across the fields like the earth had taken a deep breath and held it. Caleb stepped onto the porch with a steaming mug in hand, the warmth curling against the morning air. The sky was a pale grey blue, and somewhere down the ridge, smoke rose from another chimney, someone else starting their day with quiet rituals. Inside the house, muffled voices and the creak of floorboards signaled the start of a new rhythm, one that no longer surprised him. There were footsteps where silence used to be, laughter where ache had once lived. Eleanor stepped outside a few minutes later, a shawl draped around her shoulders, her own mug clasped between her hands. Her cheeks were still flushed from the stove's heat. She leaned against the porch post beside him. You always come out here before the rest of the world wakes up, she said. It's the only time the house is quiet, he replied, glancing at her. But I don't mind the noise now. She gave a soft smile. It's a good kind of noise. He sipped his coffee, then looked out toward the ridge. Ruth says the town committee wants you to help plan the harvest fair. Eleanor chuckled. She mentioned it yesterday at the store. I told her I don't know the first thing about local traditions. Didn't stop her, Caleb said. No, it didn't. She said I'd bring fresh eyes, and then handed me a folder thicker than a preacher's Bible. Caleb laughed, quiet but full. You're becoming part of this place. I think I already have. They stood in silence for a beat. Then Eleanor glanced at him, more serious now. And you? Do you ever feel like it's too much? All this? He turned toward her. Every day. And also not enough. Like I'm finally living a life I used to dream about. But I keep waiting for someone to tell me it's borrowed. Eleanor reached over and brushed a bit of sawdust from his sleeve. It's not borrowed. You earned it. Every splinter of it. Inside, the children were up. Daniel's voice calling out something about burnt toast, followed by Becky's triumphant, I didn't burn it, I made it golden. Caleb grinned. Sounds like breakfast is an adventure. Eleanor's smile softened. Every morning with them is. That afternoon they walked into town together, Eleanor carrying Becky's hand-stitched school satchel, Caleb holding Daniel's latest drawing, folded carefully in his coat pocket. It was of the cottage, all four of them standing outside, and in Daniel's careful, slanted handwriting beneath it. Home. The church bell rang noon as they approached the general store. May Pritchard stood outside with two other women, their voices falling silent as the family approached. Eleanor held her head high, offering a polite nod. Caleb matched her stride, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Inside, Virginia Halford looked up from the counter, her eyes catching on Daniel. "Well, that's a familiar face," she said kindly. "Looks like the Mercers are growing." Eleanor smiled. "We like to think of ourselves as well-rooted now." "Good. This town could use more roots and fewer thorns." Caleb raised a brow. "That directed at anyone in particular?" Virginia just hummed and went back to wrapping a parcel. As they stepped back into the street, Daniel tugged on Caleb's sleeve. "Do you think I could invite the Martins to visit sometime? I want them to see I'm okay." Caleb stopped, heart catching for a second. "I think that's a good idea." "They were good to me," Daniel said, "but I didn't feel like I belonged there." "Not really." "You don't have to explain," Caleb said, voice low. "You're where you need to be now." Daniel nodded, then ran ahead with Becky toward the schoolhouse steps. Eleanor looked at Caleb as they watched the children disappear inside. "He's still carrying questions." "We'll answer them," Caleb said. "Together." She nodded slowly. "You ever think about what comes next?" "Not just for them. For us." His gaze drifted down the street, where townsfolk moved in their usual rhythm. He thought about quiet winters, spring plantings, slow Sundays, and Eleanor beside him in all of it. "I think about it every day." "And?" she asked. He turned to face her fully. "And I know I don't want to live another season without knowing where you stand." She didn't flinch. "You already know where I stand. I'm here. I'm choosing this." Every morning, every storm, every quiet minute. He reached for her hand and threaded his fingers through hers. "So, we stop pretending," he said, "that we're something temporary." She searched his face, her voice low. "You're not just asking for a future, you're asking for a promise. I'm asking you to make this permanent. Whatever we started as, it became something I can't walk away from." "I don't want to. You and the kids, you're my life now." Eleanor closed the distance between them with one step. Her other hand reached up and rested against his cheek. "Then let's stop waiting for permission," she whispered. "Let's build it, day by day." He leaned in, forehead resting against hers. The noise of town blurred around them, as if the world paused, just for a moment, to give them this. And when they pulled apart, the air between them had shifted, not in hesitation, but in certainty. The kind that roots itself deeper than fear. The kind that stays. The last Saturday of October arrived, dressed in amber and gold. Willow Creek bustled more than usual, rows of booths lining the square, pies cooling behind makeshift tables, and the scent of cider and clove weaving through the crisp air. It was the Harvest Fair, a town tradition older than most of its buildings. And this year, it felt different. It felt full. Eleanor stood near the town gazebo, helping Ruth hang the last of the fabric banners between two poles. Her fingers were cold, but her smile was steady. Becky darted back and forth between booths, with Daniel close behind her, their laughter cutting across the hum of the crowd like the ring of a bell. "I don't think I've ever seen him smile like that," Ruth said, nodding toward Daniel as he tried to win Becky a paper sunflower at the ring toss. "He's figuring it out," Eleanor replied. "How to live in his own skin." "And what about you?" Ruth turned to her. "Have you figured out where yours fits?" Eleanor looked across the square, where Caleb stood talking with Tom Larrabee and a few other men from the mill. His arms were crossed, but his posture was easy. He looked at home, like a man who no longer lived in the shadow of what he'd lost. "I have," Eleanor said. "It took time," And choice. Ruth handed her a spool of twine. Every good thing does. Later in the afternoon, as the square filled and music from the local fiddle band floated over the hill, Caleb found Eleanor sitting beneath the old oak tree on the far side of the green. She was watching the children race through a maze of stacked hay bales. Her eyes followed Daniel, then shifted to Becky, then back again. He sat beside her in the grass, the sun warming their backs. "They made a home faster than I did," he said quietly. "That's because they don't measure time the way we do," she replied. "They measure by how often someone shows up." Caleb nodded, brushing his hand through the grass. "And you? Have I shown up enough?" Eleanor turned to him. "You never really left." He hesitated, then pulled a small folded cloth from his coat pocket. Her breath caught. He didn't open it yet, just held it in his lap. "You remember the stone circle on the ridge?" he asked. She nodded. "Where the wildflowers come in every spring. That's where I first thought about asking you. Really asking." Her voice lowered. "Why didn't you?" "I wasn't sure it was fair, asking you to carry everything with me. A boy who remembers only pieces, a past I haven't always handled well." "And now?" she asked. He unfolded the cloth. Inside was a simple band, brushed silver, smooth at the edges, with a tiny carving along the inner rim. A rabbit. Barely visible unless you knew it was there. "Now I know life doesn't wait until we feel ready," he said. "It comes when it comes. And if we're lucky, it brings someone who stays." Eleanor reached for his hand. "You're asking me to stay?" "I'm asking you to choose this," he said. "For real. For good. I know it won't always be simple, but I don't want a simple life. I want ours." Her fingers tightened around his, and when she spoke, her voice cracked, soft and sure. "Then yes. 1,000 times yes." From across the square, Becky shrieked with delight as Daniel held up a lopsided caramel apple he'd won. She ran to show Eleanor just as the town bell began to chime. "Did you see?" Becky shouted. "I helped him win it. We're going to share it, half and half." Daniel grinned, his front tooth missing. She picked the one with the most nuts. Caleb stood and ruffled Daniel's hair. "Looks like you've got good taste." Eleanor rose, brushing grass from her skirt, and glanced at Caleb. "You want to tell them?" He nodded, then turned to the kids. "Hey, come here a sec." They both stepped closer. Caleb crouched down to their level. "Eleanor and I are going to make this official. We're going to be a family." Becky gasped, grabbing Eleanor's hand. "You're gonna be Mrs. Mercer?" Daniel looked up slowly, then back at the ring. "Does that mean we don't have to leave? Ever?" Caleb's voice wavered. "It means you're home. And no one's sending you anywhere else." Daniel threw his arms around him without a word. Becky joined a second later, her little arms wrapping around them both. Eleanor stood over them, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks, unnoticed. The sun dipped lower, casting everything in soft gold. The fair went on behind them. Music, laughter, the shouts of neighbors greeting one another. But for that moment, beneath the old oak tree, it was just the four of them. One family, built not from blood but from choice, and from the courage to love again. The first snow arrived early that year, soft and slow, brushing the porch railings like a whisper, and covering the hills in a pale hush. It was the kind of snow that didn't demand anything, just invited you to pause, to breathe, to take stock of what had become of your life. Inside the cottage, the fire snapped gently in the hearth. Becky sat cross-legged on the rug, carefully tying ribbons around small pine cones she and Daniel had gathered the day before. Daniel leaned over a sheet of paper at the kitchen table, writing in large, careful letters. Every few lines, he'd stop and ask Eleanor how to spell something. Caleb stood back from it all, arms crossed, just watching. The tree in the corner wasn't much, short and full of bare patches, but it held every ornament with pride. Handmade stars, crooked bows, and right in the center, a small wooden rabbit dangling from red thread. "I think we need one more thing," Eleanor said, her voice warm as she walked in from the back room with a quilt tucked under one arm. She unfolded it carefully and spread it across the back of the couch. It was patchwork, scraps of Becky's dresses, a bit of Daniel's old shirt, part of Caleb's flannel stitched alongside Eleanor's old apron hem. Tiny pieces of all of them, sewn together like memory. Becky gasped. "You finished it." Daniel stood beside her, running his fingers across the seams. "Is this for us?" "For all of us," Eleanor said. Caleb stepped forward, brushing his hand over a square near the center. It was blue with little white dots, faded but familiar. "That was from William's blanket," he said, his voice catching. Daniel looked up. "I remember that. I used to carry it everywhere." Eleanor placed a hand on his back. "Now it carries you." The house fell quiet for a beat. The kind of silence that felt sacred. Then Becky piped up. "I think we should take a picture." "With what camera?" Caleb chuckled. Becky beamed. "With our minds. That's what Mama always says. Make a picture in your heart." Eleanor smiled softly. "And sometimes that's the one that lasts the longest." Daniel walked to the bookshelf and picked up a slim folder, holding it gently. "Can I show you something?" They all turned to him. He opened the folder and pulled out a piece of lined paper. An essay, written neatly in his best handwriting. "It's for school," he said. "But really, it's for you." He cleared his throat, his voice small but steady. "My name used to be William, but I didn't remember that until someone gave me a rabbit that felt like home. I've lived in more places than I can count, but none of them stayed in my heart like this one. I think family isn't who you're born to. It's who finds you when you're lost and doesn't stop calling your name until you remember who you are." He paused. Swallowed. "My dad found me, and my sister held my hand. And my mom, well, she came looking long before she knew why." Eleanor blinked fast, one hand over her mouth. Daniel folded the paper and held it out. "Can we keep it here?" "On the shelf." Caleb took it from him with both hands. "We'll frame it." Later that night, after the children had gone to bed, Becky with her arms wrapped tight around her doll, Daniel with the rabbit tucked just beneath his pillow, Eleanor and Caleb sat on the porch swing, mugs of warm cider in hand. Snow still drifted slowly, blanketing the garden and the fence beyond. "You know," Caleb said, "I used to believe some losses just lived in you forever, like ghosts that rearranged the furniture in your heart without asking." Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. "I think that's still true. But maybe, if you let the right people in, they help you move the furniture back where it belongs." He smiled. "Or build something new with it." They rocked in silence for a long while, the creak of the swing matching the rhythm of the wind. "I never thought I'd get this," he murmured. "Not really. A family, a second chance. Someone like you." She looked up at him, eyes soft. "And I never thought helping someone would give me back the part of myself I thought I'd lost." He took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Thank you. Thank." for walking through every uncertain step with me. Eleanor's voice broke slightly as she whispered, "Thank you for opening the door." Inside, a light flickered from the kitchen window, casting a golden glow across the snow. Caleb reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small box. Simple, unwrapped. "I figured," he said quietly, "that the first time I asked you to stay, it was with words. The second time, with a ring. But this time, this one's for forever." He opened the box. Inside was a new band. Engraved inside, "We found our way home." Eleanor covered her mouth, tears welling instantly. "I want to stand in front of our people," he said, "and tell them what I already know, that you are my heart, that this family is my life." She nodded through the tears. "Yes." He slipped the ring on her finger. And just as he did, the wind carried the sound of two small voices through the crack in the window. "Mama? Mr. Caleb? Are we still a family if we're all in different rooms?" Caleb laughed, deep and full. "We're a family no matter where we are." Eleanor called back gently, "Go back to bed, loves. We'll be in soon." The porch swing rocked once more as they settled into the quiet again, the kind of quiet that no longer felt empty. It felt like everything had come home. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way.